Thank God comic book movies have become what they are today. So Swamp Thing tells the story of a scientist who has turned into a half-plant, half-man super being. What is going on, guys, and welcome back to the Wes Craven review series. We are now at his fourth major release, and that is 1982's Swamp Thing. Another first-time watch for me. There's going to be a lot of those in this review series, a lot of his earlier stuff especially. Swamp Thing is a movie that, up until maybe a couple of years ago, I didn't even realize was a Wes Craven film. I had heard of the character of Swamp Thing. I had seen it. I think there was a cartoon in the early 90s I might have watched an episode or two of, so I'm cognizant of the concept of the character of Swamp Thing, but I have never really sat down and watched any version of this character. There was even a pretty recent CW show that I was slightly interested in because Derek Mears was playing Swamp Thing, but then they canceled the bitch after one episode aired, so this is a property that, let's just say, has had some problems over the years. So after cementing his legacy in the horror genre with The Last House on the Left and then The Hills Have Eyes, Wes Craven wanted to branch out of the horror genre, show that he was not a one-trick pony, and kind of exercise his creativity a little bit in other genres. So he was actively looking for a script to make an action film. There was producers out there that were actively trying to produce DC properties after the success of Christopher Reeve's Superman, and things got put together. Wes Craven was hired to direct a film adaptation of DC's Swamp Thing. Unfortunately, because the lack of major studio backing and just the popularity of the character himself, the budgetary restrictions that Wes Craven had to undergo to make this film was pretty extreme. I think there was about a $2.5 million budget for this film compared to Superman that was like closer to 55, 60 million. So pretty sizable fraction of what most superhero films of the time were getting produced for. That added in with the fact that the production company and the bond company that provided the financial backing for this was constantly on set, was constantly getting into Wes Craven's ass, was constantly making him cut corners, cut scenes, take things out of his script. We ended up with a film, like a lot of films it seems like in the comic book film history, that was just a small sliver of what the original intention was supposed to be. So with that being said, with this being a film from 1982 that I have never seen before, with it being a character that I have no familiarity with, and with this being the first time I have ever watched a Wes Craven action comic book film before, what did I think of Swamp Thing? Well, I'll be bluntly honest with you, I was not a fan of this one. Not to say that there aren't some good things about it though, so let's talk about the positives, the good about 1982's Swamp Thing. I think overall, most of the performances here are pretty good. You got Adrienne Barbeau, who was very early on in her career. She eventually became one of the Scream Queens with a lot of involvement in John Carpenter's films. He was actually the one that convinced her to take this movie. She does very well here for what she is given as kind of like the love interest, kind of the catalyst for the audience to enter this story, because she's literally inserted into it right as everything pops off, and she kind of becomes the main goal, the main thing that Swamp Thing wants to protect and save throughout the film. I think that both versions of the character of Swamp Thing, both Ray Wise as the human version and Dick Durock as the actual Swamp Thing, are pretty good. I mean, Dick Durock's very confined. I mean, he's got this rubber suit. He can only do so much, and they filmed this thing in the South Carolina swamps in the summer, so I imagine it was fucking miserable trying to film this film. But he does pretty good. Everybody all around in this movie, for a campy little 1980s comic book film, they do their jobs pretty well. I think the pacing is actually pretty breakneck for the first half or so of the film. As soon as you are introduced to this situation, as soon as you follow Adrienne Barbeau's character into this storyline, things immediately go wrong. Things immediately turn to murder, with the bad guys invading into this little science laboratory and taking the evidence, taking all of the research, killing the main character, turning him into Swamp Thing. Then all of a sudden there's just action sequences galore where they're trying to figure out where the rest of this research is in this swamp, all the while getting fucked up by Swamp Thing left and right while he flings people left and right and punches their cars and punches their boats aside, and they're wondering, what the hell is this thing walking around in the swamp? So aside from where things go in the last half, I think the pacing of the movie was actually pretty quick. It was very efficient for an action-type film, and that's something that Wes Craven eventually becomes very known for in his films, as being very efficient. Just get into the story, get into the meat, wasting no time. And finally, I do like the idea of Swamp Thing, which I guess is more of a testament to the comics than it is the movie, but the character of this scientist that's trying to cure world hunger by molding different DNAs with human and plants and trying to get plants to fight for themselves and be able to grow where they shouldn't be able to grow to eventually, sustain a food source for man whenever things eventually wipe out. And whenever he gets turned into the Swamp Thing and quite literally becomes the product of his research into this superhuman being that's relegated to these swamps, I think it's a bit of a tragic story that is interesting. He's a cool looking character, especially the more modern versions. Like the Derek Mears version obviously looks much better, but that's just a testament to the time and the budgets and things that we have learned over the decades. But just in general, the concept of the character for a comic book or a superhero or anti-hero property, it's a pretty neat concept. Now moving on to the negatives, and I could say that this thing is dated, but I think because of the budgetary restrictions, this thing never really felt all that primitive, even whenever it came out in 1982. I would put money on that. It looks pretty rough. I mean, the special effects on the facial expressions and some of the detail work on Swamp Thing looks pretty good, but whenever he's walking around and fighting, it looks rough. I mean, it looks like a guy in a rubber suit. All of the stunt work is very generic and wash, rinse, repeat. I mean, there's no genuine fighting in this movie. It's just Swamp Thing slowly grabbing a guy, throwing him, and then the film cuts to somebody flying through the air. Ah! And then they just do that over and over again. Even when you do get a legit fight in this movie with the third act and where the villain goes, I mean, it's just very goofy. It's very odd. It's very campy. I could see somebody that absolutely loves like the trashy side of 70s and 80s camp just falling in love with this, but as somebody who's watching it for the first time in 2022, in an age where we have Spider-Man No Way Home a few months ago, we got Batman coming out next month, it's hard. It's very hard to watch this movie and be entertained by it outside of the unintentional comedy. I also felt like this movie was really weirdly unfocused. I don't quite know if Wes Craven was fully on board for doing a straight up action comic book movie. For him feeling like and saying that he wanted to get out of the horror genre, it felt like he didn't quite know how not to make a horror film, which is odd. You watch this and clearly he's going for camp, he's going for action, he's going for the pacing of an action film, but everything is much darker. He gets Harry Manfredini to come in and do the score, which we're going to be talking about it again in Hills Have Eyes Part 2, but it literally just sounds like the B-sides of his Friday the 13th score, so that just puts you in slasher mode. He's grabbing guys and like crushing their skulls. He's got Krug by the fucking cranium and just blood's coming out. There was even a cut scene that apparently is on like the international version where Adrienne Barbeau is sitting there in the middle of the nasty ass swamp just pouring water all over her titties and out there in the middle of the swamp, and it's like, dude, if you're trying to make a comic book film and prove that you're not a one-trick pony and do this thing where you're, making a film that everybody can watch, kids, adults, comic book fans, everything, why are you tugging everything back into the horror genre? I mean, it's no question why he eventually stuck with horror. That was obviously his bread and butter, but this movie it's odd that it was trying to make a statement, and yet the statement it made was that Wes Craven, horror. Just go to horror. I never really felt all that invested in the relationship between Swamp Thing and Adrienne Barbeau's character because she's inserted into this storyline so quickly that her romance that buds with the doctor just feels rushed. It feels sudden. It feels like they just had their first kiss and it was kind of this passionate, moment of excitement because they reached this breakthrough, and then all of a sudden he dies, and then the rest of the movie we're meant to believe like they're in love, like he's just trying everything he can to lay down his life to save Adrienne Barbeau, and she's just captivated and smitten by him the entire time. Even when he's this green monster, I didn't buy it. not enough development. And that part of that is because it was sacrificed to get the things going really quickly, which I said, I do like the pace of the film at first, but there was not enough development of their relationship to make that be the central core theme of the movie. It just didn't feel like a relationship. It didn't feel like there was really anything there because we just got introduced to them as they got introduced to each other. The reveal of the villain, as well as the development of the villain's plan and what exactly he wants with this research, was very muddy and very awkwardly handled. I mean, you get the villain, it's kind of explained in like a line of exposition just in passing in the first few minutes of the film, like this myth that this guy might exist. And then he literally shows up and does a Mission Impossible face reveal, and you're like, I don't know who this fucking guy is. That holds no weight for me. And that's how you're introduced to the villain. He literally just shows up as he's doing villainous things, and then he's essentially like a third-tier Bond villain the rest of the movie, where he's just sitting in his rich-ass house wanting things brought to him by his minions. And even to the point where he turns himself into a monster by the end, which we'll be getting into that. But I never really quite understood what his plan was. What did he want this research for? What was he trying to do with it? Was he trying to sell it? Was he trying to use it for his own nefarious means? Was he just wanting to become super powerful? I mean, it was all very muddy. It was just like, that's your bad guy, so he's the guy doing bad shit. Just keep that in mind. That's the guy we want Swamp Thing to beat up by the end, okay? Got it? Okay, cool. And my God, when it gets to the point where the main villain takes this super plant serum and turns himself into the monster villain for the final act of the film, it was horrendous. I looked at it and like he's turning, and I didn't quite know what he was going to become. I'm like, is he going to become like this ferocious monster? Is he just going to look exactly like Swamp Thing? And he goes into this little fucking cocoon thing, and then he starts breaking out of it, and all I saw was like a little bit of a wolf, maybe a little bit of a bear, and then all of a sudden there's a pig snout, and then that monstrous side of him is just the head. The rest of it is just human in rubber suit, and holy fuck. All I could think of was this.
I'm talking, of course, about Man-Bear Pig.
Man-Bear Pig?
And the fact that he's carrying around like this Excalibur sword the rest of the movie too just did not fit. Like, what the fuck are you gonna do with that? Bullets are literally bouncing off of Swamp Thing, but you got fucking the sword and the stone here.
I'm super cereal.
That was just so laughable. The fight scene looked terrible. I was never intimidated. I mean, that was to the point where it almost got to a level of like early Star Trek parody. Remember that video that's always parodied where he's punching the fucking Godzilla thing in the rubber suit? Like it felt like special effects had not advanced at all from that episode of Star Trek to this movie. So all in all, guys, not a whole lot to talk about here. I did not enjoy this. It's not really my type of thing, even if it was really, really cool for the time, which I have my doubts that it was. I mean, it wasn't a success, so it didn't really gravitate to modern audiences very much in 1982. But I'm not really even somebody that can get into the super campy side of comic book stuff. I can't get into the Adam West Batman, and this kind of falls into that character and that category, unfortunately. So whether you're a fan of Wes Craven or a fan of the Swamp Thing DC property, I don't think this was a very entertaining movie. I don't think that this was the best representation of Wes or the Swamp Thing. So I'm gonna have to recommend that you skip it. So what do you guys think of Swamp Thing? Are you a fan of this? Did you enjoy Return of the Swamp Thing and the eventual TV series? Were you a fan of this entire property all the way from the 80s? Or are you watching this for the first time like I am? And what are your thoughts? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know your thoughts down below, guys. Do you think Wes Craven should have done more action movies? That's another interesting question. Or do you think he was just destined to be the horror guy? Let me know down below and we will talk about it. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you are a fan of Wes Craven. We're going through his entire filmography here with the exception of Nightmare on Elm Street and Scream because I've already reviewed those. But we're going to be talking about Hills Have Eyes Part 2 here in a couple of days. And if you are a patron of mine, I'm going to try to get that video actually up tonight so that you can watch that a couple of days early. So also, if you want to contribute to this channel and be a backer of mine on Patreon, the link is down below for that. Check out all the different tiers and the different perks that are available for that, one of which is early access videos. So thank you guys, as always, for watching, and remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.